Can you hear me well, Brad?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, well, let's dig in. OTS queen rearing, never buy bees again. I want to someday write a book or create a video series with that title, Never Buy Bees Again. That's kind of what really inspires me. Just so you know, from my standpoint, I don't have anything to gain from this other than just my love for bees and helping typically the hobbyist, the backyard beekeeper, get successful with their beekeeping. So that's why I'm doing this, why I'm helping out Brad with this presentation. Stop me at any point. Probably, Brad, if you ask questions up near that computer, I can hear you well. And I can answer any questions, or just jot them down and we'll cover them at the end. Okay, just a bit of a summary. What we're gonna cover here. I want to explain the concepts around. Let me just adjust here a bit. The concepts around OTS queen rearing. I want to help you understand maybe a different or new way of becoming self-sufficient, and some keys to never having to buy bees again from especially non-local bees, and then answer your questions. A little bit about me. I originate from Washington State, and most recently lived in Alaska a couple years before moving to the Cleveland area for work and also for health reasons for my wife. Alaska is really hard on some people, and so we needed to either go back to Oregon or here for work, and this is where we landed. And so I had to start over my beekeeping, which started back in about 2004, making lots of mistakes all along the way, like every beekeeper does. And had to start over again here in Cleveland, left all my junk behind in Alaska, where I did try to do bees as well, unsuccessfully. And in the process, went to a tri-county bee convention they've got down here in Worcester, Ohio, and met an old gentleman named Mel, which we'll get into a little bit, and learned about this OTS idea, and it did revolutionize the way I've done bees since, which was about 2012, 2013 actually. I'm still learning. I'm just I'm married just 25 years this month, and that's got to count for something. And I have 6 children from 24 down to 11, and I'm busy. So paradigms. I want to talk a little bit about the existing paradigm, the old paradigm a lot of people find themselves in, and then a new paradigm that hopefully maybe you'll catch on to as we talk. The old paradigm. I'm going to draw here. I like to draw. The old paradigm was having to buy bees almost every year. My father-in-law lives in Oregon yet, and the poor guy buys bees every year and upsets his wife, and you know, hundreds of dollars, queens and bees. Often he's most often getting his bees from California, of course, and that's the old paradigm that's actually the existing paradigm for most people that do bees. Most are intimidated by the idea of grafting queens or just raising queens in general. Most that I talk to are intimidated by that idea and just give into the idea of getting queens shipped to them. You know, once it gets to this time of year and a little later, you start hearing from folks that need queens, need bees, need brood. They've lost swarms, their bees are dying, and they're getting caught without resources during the year, which obviously makes them look for or have to buy bees from somebody else. The existing paradigm as well is that most folks, especially in colder climates, are experiencing significant losses, if not all their bees, each winter. And then a lot of folks are still reliant on synthetic chemicals for controlling mites, among other things. So that is the old paradigm. I want to talk about today a way to change that way of doing and thinking bees, and it really is just a few tweaks and understanding. I think with this new paradigm I've experienced and people that I teach have experienced, usually they're maybe into beekeeping 1 or 2 years, and they catch on to these ideas. They stumble a little bit for a year or so, and then they're self-reliant, and I don't hear from them again, and that's a good thing. But for me personally, when I switched to some of these ideas in 2013, 2014 especially, I experienced the reality of not having to buy bees, queens, etc. And I personally started with some carniolan stock from about an hour or so away from somebody that was recommended, and since I haven't had to buy queens or packages or nukes. The new paradigm gives you confidence with raising high quality queens, and it's really quite easy. Anyone can do it, and it's just a matter of understanding some of the basic principles and timing with raising queens. More than enough resources to use and share, that's my problem. Brad and I were talking about this yesterday, is I don't have enough equipment. I've got more bees than I need. I'm already thinking about this year, who can I give my bees away to? How can I sell some cheap maybe to get them off my hands? I've got too many bees. And that's a good problem to have. That's actually where beekeepers need to be. Lower and more consistent losses, that's been my experience in the last 6-8 years, has been, you know, every beekeeper loses bees for different reasons. Sometimes our own mistakes, sometimes things that are out of our control like weather. And that's just a reality, but I do think that if you can switch up the way you do and manage bees, you can see more consistent losses, more, you can look at it, you know, you can, how shall I say, you can count on a certain percentage and not stress about it over the winter. And then less reliance on chemical control. And I'm not a treatment-free kind of guy, but I do stay far away from synthetic chemicals in the hive. I will use oxalic vapor. I've got a nice ProVap machine that's really handy for the number of hives that I've got. And but I use it sparingly, only when needed and at the right time. And I'll talk more about when I do that. Okay, let's get into what is OTS. And like I mentioned, Mel Disselcohen lives in Michigan, mid-state somewhere, around Grand Rapids, I believe. And his site is called mdasplitter.com. He created some kind of a mating nuke back in the day, and that's why that site is named that, MDA Splitter, but now it's mostly focused on his OTS idea and selling his book. And he's got a great book that he charges $70 for, which is worth every penny. It's overpriced compared to most books, but just ask yourself the question, how much do you pay for a package of bees if you had to buy them? And what if this book helped you understand how not to do that ever again? And you'll see the return on investment's good. And I don't have anything to do with Mel, but his book changed my beekeeping trajectory, and I highly recommend it. It's called OTS Queen Rearing. OTS is just something that Mel coined, meaning on the spot, and he's referencing the idea of being able to raise queens in the apiary while you're out there without having to have any extra equipment other than your hive tool and a little bit of knowledge. And so that's why he called it on the spot queen rearing. And like I mentioned, it's an easy method. Anybody can learn. I've taught kids, older folks that have just started, and after showing them and giving them a little bit of hands-on or some pictures, depending on their skill level, most folks are successful. I think OTS empowers beekeepers to do a number of things: raise quality queens, and I need to start taking more pictures. Brad's been taking some pictures. Other folks on the beekeeping community we have on Facebook, which he can point you to. Just looking at the brood patterns, the overall size of the queens, their characteristics, they're just as good as any queens I've bought from anywhere else. And you just have to try it to see. OTS gives people the power to increase their colonies quite easily. To let's see, how does he say this? He to outbreed your losses or outbreed your mite. Anyways, I'm not thinking straight, but anyways, you can increase your colonies more than you need with just the resources you have. It saves you money, of course. You're not buying bees. It prevents swarms if you do it the way Mel discusses in the book, which we'll get into. And so you're not losing bees to the trees, which I like to say. And then it helps you to manage mites. And for me, I started to enjoy beekeeping again. And as I've seen with other folks too, it's fun again. As you know, when mites came and other diseases came in the 90s, etc., beekeeping has become quite more, difficult compared to the past. But with some adjustments, I think we can get back to enjoying it again. Let's talk about some of the main steps with OTS. And I'm gonna walk through 3 slides with some copy, and then I'll actually pull in a couple of pictures from the book, Mel's book, for a more visual presentation of the same ideas. So maybe that will help you understand the concepts. So I'm going to go through a typical bee season in my yard in brief, and I just really wrapped this up yesterday. It actually, Brad was a bit providential that I missed the flight because I had a lot of beekeeping to do yesterday. So, but I'm going to walk through what I do in my yard, and we're just going to focus on one colony, one overwintered colony. So you're not confused. I'm not talking about all the colonies in my yard, but I'm going to talk about what I do per colony. And you can do the math and extrapolate from there. Your goal with the following approach is realistic increase. There's other ways of, there's different choices that you have as you walk through this process, depending on your goals. Do you want to increase your colonies? Do you want to raise honey, or a mixture of both, basically? And there's different options for us along the way. All right, so for me, typically in the Cleveland area, 1 week before swarm season's about May 1st to May 7th, right in there. This year, I did this process starting May 3rd and May 5th, and I was a little bit anxious. I think I jumped the gun a bit. I should have waited another week. But all things being equal, this is the typical start date for me for OTS on May 1st, 1 week before swarm season. So I'm typically looking at dandelions popping in my neighborhood and start counting from there that swarm season's about 20 days after. It's going to be different for you, and I don't know how you guys determine swarm season or general idea, but that's something that you guys can talk about together. That would be a great discussion. So anyways, on May 1st, the first thing I do with an overwintered, I'm looking at an overwintered colony in front of me, and it's time to do an artificial swarm and notch that parent colony and create a start and a cell builder, basically. So what I'm doing is I'm opening up that colony, and I'm carefully assessing how much brood I have. I need to see at least 6 frames of brood, more preferably about 8. I want to see things humming, and this colony's healthy and mature and likely to swarm in the next couple weeks, or at least start that process. So I'm going to open up the hive and do an inspection, pull out the first frame, and then start looking for the queen. And I'm going to take that queen. She's usually going to be on a frame of brood, and I'm going to set her in a new box, a nuke box, or a 10-frame box, and then I'm going to give her an additional frame of brood, maybe 2 frames of brood, a frame of honey, and a frame of comb. And I have created now an artificial swarm. I've taken her out of the equation, and what I've got left is a lot of bees, a lot of brood, and no queen in that original parent colony. And what I do is take my hive tool, and I'll show you some pictures later so that you're not confused. I take my hive tool, and on some of the newer, just emerged larvae, I'm going to notch, I'm going to break away the lower third of the cell all the way to the foundation and just bend my hive tool down and mush the wax below the those cells. And what that does is it just instructs the bees, it helps the bees think about raising a queen cell right there at that spot. And I'm looking for larvae that have just emerged, that are 36 hours or younger, just as if I was going to be grafting, which I've done a lot of as well, but I don't do anymore. I don't need to. As a grafter, you're looking for just emerged larvae laying in that tiny pool of royal jelly. It's the same thing. You're going to notch below that same age larva. And you're going to notch on at least a couple, maybe 3 frames that you find those aged larvae. Put everything back together, put those notched frames right in the middle and sandwich everything together and the extra frames on the outside. Close that hive back up, and you're done. And you can leave that that artificial swarm that you just created right next to the parent colony. I do this all the time. I don't move my colonies elsewhere, and they do just fine. So that's the first step of OTS. It's a 2-step process. Now you wait 7 days. So usually I do this on a Saturday afternoon. The following Saturday on May 8th, I'm going to go to that cell builder colony, and I'm going to see how I did with raising of queen cells. And without fail, you're going to open up that colony and you're going to find cells on at least 2 or 3 frames. And now you've got options. You can just maintain that 1 cell builder, or you can split it into 2 or even 3 additional starts. And as you just want to split the resources up and make sure you feed if there's not, you don't have enough honey frames. What's really important is that with each start, that you cull the cells just down to 1 or 2 queen cells. You don't want a bunch of queen cells, queens fighting, or having after swarms with virgin queens, that kind of a thing. You now have mating colonies ready to mate those queen cells once they emerge, is basically what you've done. So let me adjust my picture here. So we notched back on May 1st, just doing the math in your head, you know, roughly 30 days out, June 1st, at the latest, you're going to have a laying queen in those colonies that you are raising the queen cells in. And typically, I'm seeing, I start checking around the 25th, 26th day after that notch. That bore out again this year. I did most of my notching on May 3rd, and on May 25th, about 90%, actually more than 90% of my colonies were laying that I just checked this week. So congratulations. If you've done this process with your overwinter colony, you now have at least 2 to 3 or even 4 laying colonies on June 1st. So that is a real rough draft of the first steps of OTS. In July, at the end of June or in July, post-solstice, which is 21st, 22nd of each year, of course, I'm you'll notice if you do some reading, or if you've done some observations, if you've a queen that was introduced or overwintered, once they get to the end of July, the hive starts to shut her down. She starts laying less, dramatically so, and that's the typical life cycle of a queen in the course of the year. They get to July and they peak, or even maybe August for some locations, and then they drastically fall off. And the problem, as you know, is that the mite cycle is every 13 days, unlike bees, which is every 21 to 24 days, and they don't stop. And so a lot of people lose their bees in August, September, October because the mite populations exceed the limit that those bees can maintain and not get sick or die. So Mel prescribes doing OTS once again, post-solstice, he calls it. And he found that when mites came in the 90s and everybody lost their bees, he noticed that some bees made it through. And he put 2 and 2 together and he realized they were swarms cast from beekeepers or wild bee populations that experienced a brood break. And that because of that brood break, that's why they survived. That's what he surmised. And so he started doing brood breaks using OTS methods again at the end of July, post-solstice, or even around July 1st. And he actually kills every queen in his yard. And that sounds crazy, but that's actually what I've been doing for the past 6 or 7 years as well. At first, it's very intimidating, removing a perfectly good queen from your colonies, but that's exactly what I do. I remove every queen. I actually bank them now on a frame of honey just for some backup, but we won't get into that. But in general, I do OTS again, this whole process I just went over at the end of July. I remove every queen from every colony and I do some notching, usually on at least one frame, usually multiple if I want to expand. This year, I don't have enough equipment. I'm not gonna expand. I'm just gonna notch one frame in each colony. And so those colonies will go through 30 days of no queen laying any eggs. And what happens is by the 24th day, every bee, a worker and drone included, has emerged with the mites that are on them. And you just have phoretic mites all over these bees, okay? And what happens when that queen gets mated and begins laying again 30 days later, those mites, which there are a number of them, are going to jump into those larvae before they're capped, and it's going to annihilate a lot of those mites. There's going to be too many per larva, and they're going to starve trying to feed off of that larva. And you're going to find that your mite populations are drastically reduced. As well, for 30 days, there's no mechanism for these mites to reproduce, so they flatline in their population, and helps the bees as well get a foothold on the mite population in those colonies. So that's the main reason, although there are more, which I'll talk about. That's one of the main reasons for doing that brood break and OTS process at the end of June or July. You are mitigating, you are helping the colonies mitigate the mite populations in their hive. As well, as I mentioned, those queens, instead of, like a typical queen will begin to fall off on their egg laying rate. These new queens that are mated post-solstice, for some reason, these colonies allow these queens to lay like they were a spring queen. So it begs the question, how are you gonna get brood populations back up with a newly mated queen? And you'll be surprised. You just watch these queens start laying and explode just like a spring queen for about months to 5 weeks, depending on how much good weather you've got, brood rearing weather. So you guys might be a bit cramped for that in your location. So you might, I would suggest doing your post solstice, your summer notching probably closer to June 21st, or maybe even a little bit earlier, if you're going to do so. So back to this July process. On July 8th, if I'm going to be expanding, I'm going to split those colonies into 2 or even 3, depending on how many queen cells I've got. And now I've got a bunch more colonies to work with. And on August 1st, again, you're going to have your queens are going to be laying. So if I go back, let me switch. Actually, I'll stop. From that first, think about it, from that first overwintered colony, you first split that out with an artificial swarm and then made some starts. You've got, let's just be conservative and say you've got 2 colonies laying at the end of May, beginning of June. If I do this post-solstice split again, doing the same process with both those 2 colonies, at the very least, I'm going to have 4 to 5 laying colonies without having to buy bees. And that's just off of 1 overwintered colony. You can just do the math. If you're wanting to expand your apiary, this is a way to do it without having to buy any queens or any packages or nukes. I'm going to switch screens now. Let me change up and point to a PDF. This is out of Mel's book. Make this smaller. And I'm just going to quickly go, just point visually and reiterate what I just talked about. And maybe this visual will help some folks catch on. So this is my first overwintered colony. It's May 1st, and I'm going to remove the queen with 2 frames of brood and the queen and the frame of honey. And actually, you want to shake a frame or 2 of nurse bees with her. Actually, any of the bees with her. She doesn't need nurse bees. And so you've got this artificial swarm, and you've got a cell builder now. And in this cell builder is where you're going to do your notching. And a week later, you've got option 1 or option 2. You can not split up that colony, and you can just make that parent colony a honey hive. And you'll find that with that brood break and no bees to rear, if you've got a decent flow, they'll fill a box up with honey. And I saw that again this May with a couple of hives that I didn't split up, got a lot of honey, more than I forced me to make some changes. Then your other option, number 2, is to take that cell builder and to split it up into 2 or 3 starts, each with a couple frames of brood, a queen cell, and you just let those sit for another 3 weeks, and you've got 3 or 4 laying colonies a month later. Then let's look at the next page here. And undo all this. So July 1st, with you've got options with that original start that's going gangbusters, and with your other starts as well. And it just depends on what you want to do. Do you want to increase your colonies, your apiary size, or do you want to just go for honey? And so you can, as you can see, you can just make larger splits or much smaller ones depending on how many queen cells you've reared. And accordingly, you'll get either more honey with the larger splits, or less, none at all actually with the smaller splits. You'll need to likely feed those in July. Okay, I'm gonna change back up. Okay, let's do some visuals about the notching, because usually I get a lot of questions. What does that look like? How do you do it? And let's take a look at some pictures here. So as you can see, or if you can see on that sheet on the wall, there's some good larvae there in the bottom of those cells that are just right for grafting. They're 36 hours or younger. They've just emerged from the eggs. The eggs have laid over, and the bees start giving them a little puddle of royal jelly. And you would notch, take your hive tool or even a stick, whatever, I just use my hive tool and I'm looking for eggs that are still standing up, and then right next to them you'll see some larvae laying down. I'll do some drawing here. And you can see the cell right here has been removed, this bottom third. And then you can just be pretty ruthless. You can just flatten it. You could flatten it even more than what's pictured here. You're just removing the wax below that. It gives them space to raise cells on the face of that comb. And especially with newer comb is what's pictured, it's really easy for them to raise the cells. And that's what it looks like below. It's a typical looking notch. And you can notch 3 or 4 times on the same side, on both sides. It really doesn't matter, as much as you want. They'll repair the notches really quickly. You don't have to worry about that. A lot of folks do. It's not a big deal. Here's another picture. On older comb, it takes a little bit more effort because you're dealing with cocoons that have built up over successive brood cycles, which you can see here, that shiny, papery cocoon lining that starts to build up in the cells. That's why it's helpful to use the hive tool, especially on the older comb. It's starting to get darker. And you need to do a little bit of sawing back and forth and get pretty aggressive with it compared to newer comb. And make sure you get all the way down to the plastic or the foundation and then bend downwards. And you don't need to worry about hitting the larva because the larva at this stage is so small, your hive tool actually can't even touch it. Even if you were to try and touch it by jamming it in there, you can't. So you don't have to worry about that. A week later, this is what those cells look like. This is from the same frame. They'll build a lot of cells, and you'll find you'll spend a bit of time just culling cells. Some folks ask, can you use those cells to pull them off? You can, if you're very, very careful, but most often I've failed when I've tried to do that. But with a razor blade and giving a wide margin around those cells and being really careful not to jar and just to slowly peel them off of the plastic foundation, you can take those cells and use them elsewhere. So hopefully that is a little bit of a help to get a visual. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other reasons why OTS works for the average backyard beekeeper, why I'm really excited about teaching this to folks. Like I've mentioned, your bees can outbreed mites with the brood breaks. So this process of raising your own queens, it might seem like it's counterproductive, like you're limiting the potential for your colonies, but the reality is you can always, if you need to, recombine these starts. You'll find that having healthy young queens in your yard at all times just mitigates a lot of the issues you might think might be present with having brood breaks like this. I find I have enough bees, more than enough honey, and it's not an issue. Your post-solstice queens are allowed to lay like a spring queen. That's something I mentioned. Your broodless colonies will, in a normal flow, pull in good amounts of honey, having no brood to rear for a month. I find this is the case all the time when there's a good flow during my brood break. So it does beg the question, when should I do OTS? And I would say you want to look at the swarming season. You also want to look at when are your flows. It's different for every location. And just time your brood breaks to be during the time when you're going to see a good flow if you're interested in getting a lot of honey. You now have all the resources you need, so every healthy colony you overwinter can easily become 8 or more colonies by fall, up to 12. If I was being really aggressive with these splits and my mating success rates were high, I would see 10 plus, 12 plus starts going into fall for every overwintered colony that I got through. So it's amazing how fast you can grow your apiary. And Brad can talk about his experiences as well. I don't know how aggressive he's gotten, but you can do so. So just visually there, this is the typical success I see folks have is having one overwintered, moving to 3 in May, and then moving to about 7 or 8 by the fall. And that's just really typical. Healthy young queens, young bees going into fall. Some other reasons why OTS works. You're raising local bees from your local survivors. I think this is probably, regardless of how you're raising queens and doing your beekeeping management, getting into the practice of not buying non-local bees is so important. And this just empowers every average to novice backyard beekeeper to do this and to do it successfully. And again, Brad and I were talking about this yesterday, and just the fact of alone raising colonies every year from winter survivors is a boon, is a big deal. And so you're actually helping the genetic diversity rather than participating in that genetic bottleneck, which is that last point there. By everyone buying their bees from the same few producers in North America, we're doing our work of increasing the viability of our own local stock that are adapted to our weather, our forage, our climate, etc. Because of these brood breaks, for about 3 to 4 years, I used nothing beyond these brood breaks. And I saw upwards of 35% loss. That was the max loss that I saw only using these OTS brood breaks. And 35% wasn't good for me, and I found there was some risk involved as well. I really felt like I needed to add in oxalic acid as well, so that's what I've done. And what I do is during that brood break on the 23rd, 24th day or so, when all the bees have emerged, I only need to give each colony 1 shot of oxalic vapor, and that exposes all the mites within that colony. If I do it early morning or late at night, you've got a really high kill rate for those mites, and you only have to do it once instead of 3 times every 5 to 7 days, however folks recommend in your area. But with that, I find that with the brood breaks and the oxalic, I don't have to rely on synthetic, I don't have to use any synthetic chemicals. Another reason this works is you're going into winter with more colonies than needed. So you're outbreeding your winter losses. If I want to get through winter for sure with 2 colonies, I just make sure I go into fall with 4. And maybe I lose 1, maybe I lose 2. It's a bad winter, and I still can maintain the levels of colonies in my apiary without having to buy bees. As well, I'm going into winter with young bees that were reared in August, September, October, depending on, I don't think you guys are probably raising bees in October, but I'm going into winter with a young queen and young bees. That's really important, that don't have a lot of mite damage. As well, we've already talked about these concepts. If done right before swarm season, you're not losing your bees to swarms. And just yesterday, I found 2 colonies that I had not done OTS with. I was trying an experiment, and they had got into swarm mode and had a bunch of cells, and I realized how much less work I've had in the last almost decade not having to deal with swarms. And it just reiterated to me the benefit of doing OTS a week before swarm season. It was a good lesson. So some caveats, some shortcuts people try to take and fail. These are some of the reasons why. I wanted to make sure and bring these up with you just to make sure that you don't have to make these mistakes. A lot of folks, especially those who are new to queen rearing, like to take a shortcut. They like to remove the artificial swarms, so they make their start, they notch their frames and then they make their splits right then. And that's just a recipe for disaster, because only strong colonies can raise good queen cells. If you're into grafting, you know, you make a cell builder, you want a high density of bees surrounding those cells on those bars. And you just can't get that density, even if you're raising a few cells like with OTS, if you don't have enough bees. There's not enough warmth, etc. Especially in spring, you're gonna see a day or two or more of cold weather at times. It just happens, and you just need those densities of bees to maintain the heat and the attention to those larvae. So taking the shortcut, you're gonna see inferior or even unmated queens. They're just not even gonna get mated. Another shortcut, excuse me, you only want to notch when there's going to be good queen rearing conditions. I see a lot of folks notch too early, or just basically do their queen rearing before you got good temps and before you've got live drones present. You can push the envelope and notch before drones have emerged, but you're risking things. You know, at the purple-eyed stage or later, by the time that queen's needing to fly, you're going to have some mature drones in the air flying, but that's taking a gamble. So a lot of times I see folks saying this doesn't work, and it's, well, you've started too soon, and there's only a small window that queen can fly out to the drone congregation areas and get mated, and if you're too soon, there's nothing you can do. Also, any queen rearing operation, doesn't matter who you are, how good you are, you're going to see, you know, at least 5–10% mating losses from queens getting eaten or getting lost, or bad weather or whatever. And that's just no different with OTS. There's no getting around that. If you're gonna get into any kind of queen mating, you're going to see some losses. This year for me, I think I mentioned. I need to count again in a couple days, but I have at least 90% at this point out of, what did I do? Around 30 colonies notched. And yeah, something like that, 35 maybe. I saw 90% at this point, maybe higher. Some other shortcuts. Proper notching. Sometimes folks don't get aggressive enough, and if you don't notch thoroughly all the way to the foundation and downwards, sometimes they'll just repair those notches. And that said, the bees will create their own. They will create their own elsewhere, especially if they've got younger wax, newer wax. So. But that's an issue. Sometimes folks say, my notches didn't work. Well, I need to see how you notched, and just need to make sure you're pretty aggressive. You need to leave a colony alone during the queen rearing period. I see this a lot as well, where folks are curious. It's natural. It's really hard to wait that week and then check your cells. People can shake the frames, and larvae are very susceptible to wing and thorax damage, leg damage by just a small shake. And so we just leave those colonies alone for the 7 days, and then very carefully look for cells. And then be patient too with the mating process. Just leave those colonies alone for the 30 full days, 25 to 30 days, and just leave them alone. And you can do a lot of damage by getting in there too soon. Another gotcha caveat is, and this goes with any kind of queen rearing operation, you're just going to find some that don't mate well, or the queens are eaten or whatever, lost. Those colonies are going to become laying worker colonies, and that's just, there's no way around that either. And so you need to have a plan for what you're going to do with laying worker colonies. And what I do is, like as Mel does as well, he's ruthless with them. He just gets a tub of soapy water and shakes every frame into that soapy water, and so that we can use that comb and resources elsewhere in the apiary. And that may sound a little cutthroat, but it's actually a very good way to go. You're saving a bunch of time. Comb on the frame is so valuable in your operation. It's hard to understate that or overstate that. The comb and resources, honey, pollen that you're going to have in that laying worker colony can be used effectively elsewhere and raise the production value of your other colonies. So that's what I do. And a reason for it is that colony is just going to get filled up with drones. It's going to be a waste of resources. If I try and combine that colony with another colony, there's a risk, albeit small. I would say a 50-50 risk, maybe a little less, that those laying workers can kill the existing queen in the laying colony because they're more flexible. They can easily sting and attack that queen. And there's usually, I don't know how many, but there's several laying workers usually, from what I understand. So if you hit 35 days or so, you're going to start to, or even sooner, you're going to see laying workers, and that's going to be multiple eggs at all angles, even on the side walls of the cells. And just so you understand, if you've not done this before, when the new queen, a newly mated queen, successful mated queen, comes back to your hive and starts laying, sometimes she'll lay 2 or 3 or 4 eggs in a cell, but you'll notice the difference is it's at the bottom of the cell, right where it should be, and that as she starts to move out on that frame, she gets the hang of it, you'll start to see just the 1 egg per cell. And so don't freak out and kill a perfectly good colony. That's just the way sometimes it works for a new queen. She just gets excited, I think, and starts laying a bunch in a cell. I still think, even though, the last point there, even though it's tempting to just rely on any method you might use for mites and get away from monitoring mites. And I think, of course, the alcohol wash is the superb method, most consistent method. None of them are entirely accurate, but a good baseline, consistent approach is an alcohol wash. And if you're getting to 3% infestation rate, basically that's the threshold. If you hit that, you want to treat. So I'm checking a couple times a year. I should check more than that, but just the way I've gotten to a good groove, and I can tell how things are going just by a quick observation usually. And with the methods I'm using with oxalic vapor, but you do want to be checking with alcohol wash, like 10% of your colonies. Depends on how big your apiary is. Sometimes you just need to spot check. If you've got 2 colonies, I'd check them both. All right, that's about 50 minutes into this. I can take questions, Brad. If you want to pass those along, I can answer any questions.
Anybody have questions? He can hear you if you speak up. There's a little tiny microphone there, so.
Hey, John, when you were talking about 90%, was that successful mating?
Yeah, so that's me going into the colony and verifying that the queens are laying and that she looks healthy.
Excellent, man.
Are you overwintering in 1 box or 2?
I'm finding that I did half and half this winter and was successful both ways, just as successful. But just for my management style and how I like to do things, I'm finding that doing both is a poor choice. And I like some of the gains I get with having 2 boxes, so I'm going to stick with that.
Thanks. Say, John, I agree what you say about the later, like the mid-season queens. I really like those type of queens. I agree with everything you say. Can you talk a little bit about when during that process, just preventing the hive from becoming honey bound?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think depending on how aggressively you're splitting them, if you're not going to split them, I would say make sure you got a queen excluder in a box of comb on them ASAP, right when you do the manipulation, because otherwise they're going to just backfill all your comb and she's going to come back and not be able to lay, so, or at least very well. it's going to take them time to remove nectar and push it up. So I make sure that if I'm they've got room above to drop nectar in.
More?
I have one question. When you're talking about the post-solstice splits, those hives wouldn't be close to swarming then, right?
No, not well. If they've already been split and they've got new queens in them, no, they wouldn't be. They wouldn't swarm if you left them the whole entire rest of the season. If they hadn't been, if these were overwintered queens left all the way up until solstice, then yeah, it would be surprising if they hadn't got into swarm mode yet.
So any of the ones that you notch that are not close to swarming, do you find that they respond to the notching as well as the ones that are close to swarming?
Yes.
They do?
If it's good queen reign, if the colony is mature and the queen is removed and it's good weather, they're going to respond to that notch and raise queens under that same impulse. I would say that's the case from, if I'm understanding your question, from for me May 7th onwards.
Yeah, I guess the question I'm asking is that do they sometimes just repair the notches and go build their queen cell somewhere else?
Oh yes, that's pretty much the case. In general, you're going to find cells that they built in cells that you notched. Now, the reason why notching is helpful, and I didn't cover this, they're going to typically, it gives you options. So if I didn't notch, what's going to happen sometimes is just queen cells built on 1 or 2 frames. If I notch on 3 or 4 frames, if I'm wanting to make splits a week later, it gives me options. I'm going to get more cells on more frames, if that makes sense. It gives me more options for splitting. Whereas I'm taking a gamble with that if I just leave them to their own devices. As well, if it's older comb, they don't like making cells on older comb unless they have to. So doing some notches on older comb really helps them along the way.
Would you be less aggressive with your splits if you were splitting into boxes that have new foundations, like not undrawn?
Yeah, I would be less aggressive and or also think about feeding with syrup.
When is your main honey flow on? And how long into the fall do you have honey flow?
For me, in the Cleveland area, I've got kind of 3 flows. I've got early spring flow, which is really tremendous right now with tulip poplar and locust, that kind of thing, and dandelion, etc. And then for me, where I'm at, I've got a midsummer flow that's really strong with basswood, etc. And that's in late June, July. And then I really count on a fall flow that goes until frost for us for the goldenrod and asters as well. So depending on your flows and as you think about honey production, you know, you just got to adjust the timing of this and how aggressive you are and your feeding regimen as well.
How big is the latest batch that you actually make grow into the full time? Is it full hive or is it still considered to be just a split?
I couldn't hear that, Brad, if you could restate it.
So what's the size of the colony going into fall? Is it a full hive or is it basically?
Yeah, it's most of my colonies are into 2 boxes going into fall when I notch at the end of June, early July. Yeah, they're completely mature and fully mature, just like any other colony. It's surprising.
So I would ask a question in terms of
when you have your notched cell queens, I know they say that they're always in a way they're better because they're mated, but how do you find longevity with those queens? Like, are they lasting the full 3 years, or are you implementing this system so they don't?
Well, the way I'm doing this management style, I'm doing it kind of by the book, so to speak, that Mel talks about in his book. And so none of my queens are over a year old. They're all, I kill every queen in my yard every July.
Yeah. It's scary. It's scary. But
Never an old queen. So.
Now, let me say, last year I tried this and it was helpful. I took, just assume, I wanted to make sure I had a specific number of colonies going into winter, and I knew, and I didn't want to do any splits. So I knew that I assumed a 10% mating loss. And so I set aside 10% of my queens, the best ones, into small 2-frame nukes with just a frame of honey and just a small shake of bees with that queen, and the entrance reduced just down to 1 bee. And I can hold that queen there for 30 days. Those few bees will go through the honey and actually raise some brood. It's be like a little mating nuke. And so I could then reunite that queen with the 10% that had a failed mating instead of having to destroy those colonies, becoming laying workers, if that makes sense.
I have a question. The bees the queens that you're killing in July are all overwintered queens. They're not queens that you've raised that summer, correct?
Well, for me, I sell most of my overwintered queens as nukes, so most of my overwintered queens are gone. So the queens that I'm killing are only 4, 5, 6 weeks old.
No mercy.
Nope.
And that's that paradigm shift that John talked about earlier. It changes this idea of that queen is the be all and end all, because it's just so quick and reliable for him to just keep refreshing that queen and make sure she's never more than a year old. And your limitation is how many boxes do you have and how many bees you can make your splits with. Really, it's not the queens. That's
Yeah.
the key in the system.
Yeah, I would suggest, trying this on not just one, maybe a couple, depends on how many colonies you got, but go through a whole season starting next spring, or even this summer to mitigate mites. But just try it for a year and observe the differences, apples and apples with your other hives.
So I just tried this actually 2 days ago. I did a split because they're starting to look like they're swarming, and I tried this method. So I'm very curious to know what's going to happen when I look in a week.
All right.
But I'm a bit concerned about leaving them alone completely and not looking in there for 37 days and then finding I've got a bunch of laying workers, because I've only got 3 colonies, and I don't want it to go too late and then find that I can't raise a queen.
So yeah, a couple things. You wouldn't want to wait 37 days. It's from the notch you start counting. And I would say you could count on, you could start checking on day 25 from your notch date for eggs. Yeah. And the only issue there is it just depends on how good you are. It's with your eyesight and spotting eggs. You're only going to find a small patch. Sometimes, like I found just 1 egg in one of my colonies this week, and that takes some experience.
And I have terrible eyesight.
Another question, John. Sometimes when you go in at 7 days after you've notched them, are they all the queen cells capped, or are some of them still not capped yet?
You might find some uncapped queen cells, and that's just them deciding, they're getting in a cell building frenzy, and they have continued to raise cells from eggs. So when you notched some of those eggs 3 days younger or so, and so they're just, those cells that you're seeing uncapped are those that are just earlier in the process.
Because I did this system, it'll be 2 weeks on Monday. And I opened the hive up. I did it on 2 hives. I opened them up last Monday, and the one hive had 3 queen cells built on the notches. 2 of them weren't capped and 1 was. The second hive, however, repaired all the notches, didn't build on any of them, and they attached all the queen cells on the bottom of one frame on the top box to one of the frames on the bottom box.
Oh.
Yeah.
I lifted the box,
Yeah.
everything pulled apart.
Yeah.
I put it back. I'm hoping that they can repair some of them. There was a lot of them on there.
Yeah, that will happen every once in a while. Yeah, part of it would be were the right age larva notched? Was the notch all the way to the midrib of the frame? Sometimes they just do their thing and you just can't control them. But I find it's rare that they just don't build cells on frames like I'm looking for. So like this summer or this spring, this month, I think out of the 35 or so, I think I had issues with maybe 1 or 2.
I hate to ask a question that you've probably already answered, but I came in just as you had finished talking about inspecting and cutting away surplus queen cells. But how many do you leave generally?
I leave at max 3, and sometimes they're such beautiful cells. I have a hard time. But really, I leave a couple. Typically, is my goal per start. Sometimes I would say. Sometimes I only have a couple of frames with 1 on each, and that's just the way it goes. And I still find I'm usually just fine.
I know a question we get a lot is, why are we not just doing a walkaway split?
You could write a book on that, but I think it's it can work, and it has worked for some people, and so they think it works all the time. And I think it's just a gamble. It's not caring for the bees the way you should, caring for the cell building process. So it's just leaving them to their own devices without knowing really what's going on. Typically, you're going to find a new beekeeper is just taking 2 boxes and setting them on different hive stands and leaving them to their own devices, and you're just taking a gamble, 50-50 gamble that you're going to get good queens and good mating. That's a nutshell.
Good enough. I guess, is there any question on that? That's a lot of times a concern.
I couldn't hear that.
I was just saying that's often a concern if anybody has a concern about that.
Well, maybe you could talk a little bit about the differences between an emergency cell and the properly reared supersedure queen cell like you're developing here.
Yeah, there's another book, right? So for me, I would ask the question back to folks, and this could be my ignorance, but if I'm a professional queen rearer, I'm going to make a cell builder and make that colony queenless and give them the resources to make queen cells. And what would be the difference? What would be the difference in the impulse by doing the same thing, by removing the queen and having them raise even fewer cells with the same resources? I personally don't know the difference. I sometimes think it's a semantics issue that is confusing. But for me, stepping back forest from the trees, it's all about how successful am I. If I'm seeing quality queens and successful beekeeping operation using this method, that begs the question.
But you're not, your queens are being reared from specifically aged larvae, am I correct on that?
Right. Now, I'm going to notch as best as I can under larvae that are 36 hours or less, and that takes some skill. It would be the same larva, however, that I would graft from if I was a queen producer. And in this method, I'm not touching that larva. I'm not touching the queen cells. I'm not shipping the queen. I'm not caging the queen. In my book, it's a little bit more natural and healthy, done right this way.
Yeah, I agree with you too. And I just see the difference from a walk-away split where they make emergency cells is a lot of the times when queens are in the hive is an emergency state, they make bad decisions on the larvae they choose. So that's the gamble you're probably talking about, the hive agent.
Right, and I think too, and it's hard to know unless you're marking the frames where you notched, they're gonna typically go choose their own anyways. And so when I get to the point of culling queen cells, I could care less if it was my notch or their choice. I'm looking for the largest, most well-formed, rough-looking, peanut-looking queen cells that are on the frames. And that's subjective. I don't know that I read an article recently that there is a bit of science to a study done on the looks of a queen cell. You could make some assumptions, but it's still pretty subjective. But I'm going to go with, just intuition, the best that, that they look.
No one else? Well, John, thank you very much for the presentation. I enjoyed it. I learned a few things. I think that the fellow sitting next to me just whispered, "Oh, I learned what I did wrong and why it didn't work." So that's fantastic.
Thanks, Brad.
Christian, I didn't say your name.
Brad, there's some info if you want to take a screenshot, picture. My email address, I'm happy to answer questions when I can. There's the website to Mel's book. There's an OTS beekeeping Facebook group that is just strictly talking about OTS beekeeping. We don't allow people to sell anything on there. I don't even. And it's just to help people with the concepts. And there's some links to other resources. And then I try and blog every 10 years or so at my website. And there's some old articles there.
Well, thanks, John. It's kind of a cold north wind here, so I'm really wishing you were here to enjoy it with us.
All right. Thank you, guys.
So thanks. I'm glad the technology worked out. We're going to head out to the apiary now, and I'm wearing